It is an interesting time to be a Detroit Red Wings fan. You take a look at this roster, and you say, hey, there are a number of impressive additions that the Canadiens have made over the past little while. Emmett Finney is still a 7th-round pick who made the league just a few years after getting drafted. Marco Kasper, for all that he has struggled through this season, that sophomore slump has been quite the pain for him, but he still is an NHL player that I think a lot of folks will say is valuable, that can provide some intangible qualities, and whose long-term progression is generally seen as a good thing. And then you have Nate Danielson, down the middle, third line, a guy who probably would have been on this team had he just been available earlier at the start of this season. There are a number of guys that the Red Wings have that we can say have been good stories, not even to include Axel Sandin Pellikka or Michael Brenseg-Newgard, who made an impact earlier on. But today I wanted to talk about that center search, and a conversation that popped up on Detroit Hockey Now as to whom it is the Red Wings probably should target the most. Right now, the Wings center core goes as follows. You've got Larkin, Comfer, Danielson, and then Andrew Kopp. Marco Kasper can also play center, as can technically Jonathan Berggren, but this is what we are greeted with right now, at least at the time of recording this video. Which is why I wanted to head over to Detroit Hockey Now, and Kevin Allen's piece from November 21st, so Friday, that talks about how one player makes more sense for the Detroit Red Wings than Alex Tuch. Also, at the time of this article's publication, the Grand Rapids Griffins played at that night. Let's scroll down there and read. The article opens up by talking about the presence of Buffalo Sabres forward Alex Tuch at number 3 on the Athletics' recent trade board, and how it's prompted considerable trade buzz amongst Detroit Red Wings fans about the possibility of Yzerman pursuing him in a trade. But maybe the fan attention is misplaced on Tuch. Tuch is desirable, to be sure. He boasts 94 goals over the past 3 seasons. At 29, he is still in his prime. The Red Wings need another scorer for their top 6 forward group. But he's going to be a UFA this summer. And will he want to cast his future with a team that hasn't made the playoffs in 9 years? He's on a team that hasn't made the playoffs in 14 years. Would the Red Wings give up a first-round pick and an elite prospect for a rental player who may have no interest in signing with them? They would want to know they could sign him. Plus, it feels like sooner or later the Sabres will offer Tuch a deal worth more than $10 million a year. He grew up rooting for the Sabres. It would seem like he would take an extension if the average salary were in line with the most recent signings. AKA the Kyle Connors, the Adrian Kempes, to a bigger extent Kaprizov, Rantanen, Necas, etc. Which is why Kevin Allen goes out there and dismisses the potential $10+ million Alex Tuch, and says this, that the better fit for the Detroit Red Wings on that athletic list may be Nashville center Ryan O'Reilly at number 7. At 34 years old, O'Reilly is still a 20 to 25 goal scorer and a 50-plus point guy. His career face-off percentage is at 55.7%, and he is over 56% this year. He's making $4.5 million this season and next. O'Reilly does have a no-movement clause, but he's an old-school player who probably would be willing to move for an opportunity to play meaningful games down the stretch. Could he be persuaded to come to Detroit for the chance to play with Patrick Kane? If so, his price tag should be less than Tuch's. We would guess the Red Wings will make a phone call about Ryan O'Reilly. Now that is quite the intriguing conversation, and obviously, we've made videos about O'Reilly with a bunch of other teams. We've discussed him in Vancouver, him in Montreal, him in Detroit now, and it makes sense, right? He is a center. All these teams that we mentioned are looking for centers, and even though O'Reilly is 34 years old, it might not necessarily be ideal to get a guy who's a lot older and bring him onto a team that has mostly younger dudes, but we have seen Steve Yzerman not be afraid to take on players with a little bit of age on them. Case in point, literally, Patrick Kane, Comfer, Mason Appleton, Andrew Kopp, James Van Riemsdyk. It's either you're an old guy or you're a young guy. The amount of guys that are in between, it's just kind of lacking in that respect. Dylan Larkin, you can say, is on the in-between. Comfer is technically on the in-between there. But between JVR and Patrick Kane and Emmett Finney and Nate Danielson, obviously there's a pretty big contrast here in terms of the age of most of these forwards. O'Reilly would be just another one of these guys on the tail end. His contract's very friendly, $4.5 million a year till the end of 2027. Even if this guy's not that good, $4.5 million is still relatively cheap, especially with the cap going up and all these other players like Tuck and Kempe and whatever potentially getting 8 figures. O'Reilly doesn't really need to have that conversation just yet. He's making 4.5, that's it. He'll make it for the next 2 seasons, and I think whichever team he ends up going to or finishes off the year with will be reasonably happy with that. O'Reilly this season has 13 points in 20 games, on pace for 54 points in 82, on pace for about 25 goals as well, which is right in line with what he had done last season with the Preds, scoring 53 points in 79 games over there. His first season with Nashville, though, saw him put up 69 points in 82, which was very, very solid. Of course, that came the summer after he was a near point-per-game player with the Toronto Maple Leafs post-trade from the St. Louis Blues. It was a pretty dramatic time for Ryan O'Reilly, seeing as the Blues technically gave up on him, and a change of scenery was evident. He did have the one good year that you can say he had, with a Conn Smythe winning playoff run, under a point per game, 77 points on the season. Ryan O'Reilly at one point was the best defensive center in the National Hockey League, as evidenced by his Selke Trophy. But ultimately, that has led him over to Nashville, where now he is on one of the worst teams in the NHL, and you can say that with all the news coming out that the Predators are open for business, yeah, it's not really all too surprising here. They are second last in the National Hockey League at the time of recording this audio. Look at that, Vancouver is 29th. That's amazing. But either way, Nashville is in a seller's position right here. They do have a pretty good core of guys that would provide value to other NHL teams, and O'Reilly is certainly part of that. I think that this guy will demand a pretty reasonably high trade price from whichever contender or borderline contender wants to use a Selke winning center from yesteryear. But do you think the Red Wings should be that team? Kevin Allen's going out there and saying so. He makes a lot more sense than Alex Tuch, in his opinion. I'd have to agree, just from that perspective alone, if I were to choose Tuch versus O'Reilly, maybe O'Reilly right now makes more sense because you don't have to commit too much money. He is a center, he plays a position of need, and he can still be reasonably good for $4.5 million. But Alex Tuch is very strong as well. I do think that Tuch provides a lot more value on the ice, but you're going to have to pay a much higher price for that. You're going to have to shell out more assets, and you're going to have to shell out more money if you do sign him. But I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What do you think would benefit the Detroit Red Wings more, Ryan O'Reilly or Alex Tuch? Allen is arguing that O'Reilly is that guy. Do you agree or disagree? This article will be linked in the description if you want to go out there and read it yourself. Let me know in the comments all your opinions. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.